questa giornata tutta dedicata al rapporto, sia già scritto sia da scrivere in futuro, e in particolare, come sempre da diversi anni a questa parte, da quando presentiamo il rapporto, il pomeriggio è dedicato ad una lecture con un invitato speciale con cui di solito ascoltiamo e con cui interagiamo. Nella fattispecie oggi avremo un panel abbastanza interattivo anche su sua proposta, che prevede una sua lezione in più tappe e un'interazione con alcuni dei colleghi che sono qui e in parte nelle prime file. Solo per questioni di organizzazione spaziale in realtà, ma tutti parteciperanno in vario modo a questa discussione. La lecture di oggi pomeriggio, and now I switch to English, penso, giusto? Sì, I switch to English directly, so that also Ivan can understand better, this is the title, Challenges of the Post-Pandemic Recovery in the European Union. Are cities crucial? This is a question mark, but there is a question mark missing from my side. And it is an honor, I stand up, otherwise it's very difficult to stay there. It is a pleasure and an honor to have Ivan Tosic here. Ivan, can you stand up and show up on the stage? Ivan Tosic, this is the definition he gives of himself in several websites and in particular in his blog. I am an urban researcher and urban explorer. If someone is interested in more formal categories, I would call myself a sociologist. I also did math, but didn't practice it professionally. I thought this was a very nice presentation. The urban explorer and researcher is an image I associate with the work that Ivan has always been doing during these years. We have probably met him everywhere in different scientific contexts, but also in the practices field, in research conferences. So moving from this very lively presentation of Ivan himself, let me had some details about why we have invited him and about his contribution to our research field, our discussion today also. This is another quotation from another CV he has probably filled online in the web site of Urbact. I strongly believe that the exchange of practices and knowledge of cities contributes greatly to the sustainability and inclusivity of urban development across Europe. Ivan is a champion of this exchange. In the last 4 years, he has been promoting a night exchange with many people around Europe and in the world. Some of us have followed those seminars online, and they have been very interesting opportunities, but he has been a champion in exchange of practices and knowledge in many places all over Europe. Another pink word in this presentation, he has been working a lot on the topic of inclusion of citizens in governance and in relation to addressing the growing democratic deficit and democracy deficit all over Europe. Whenever you meet Ivan, you have in mind that you are discussing about the urban sphere, but also about this issue of democracy. He's always keen to present examples all over Europe, but based also on his country, and this is another very important characteristic of his work, being rooted, but at the same time being European and also international. As you can read also in the last lines, eastern semi-peripheries of the EU, this is probably his observatory point, but he has been central to many very important building site of innovation in the urban sphere, and Urbact, Eurocities, Eura, and other contexts, research contexts and practices contexts have seen him as a protagonist, always active and provocative also in his work. Of course, there is an official portrait, and this official portrait means that he is one of the principals of the Metropolitan Research Institute he founded a while ago in Budapest. I already said he is a mathematician and sociologist, and I like this couple. working on urban sociology, strategic development, housing policies, and EU regional policy issues. You can read here he has been one of the three thematic poll managers of the URBAC program. He teaches also in PhD programs at the University of Pest. Vice Chair of the European Network for Housing Research, board member of the European Urban Research Association, and member of the Advisory Board of UN Habitat. He's the policy editor of our journal in EURA, because I'm part of EURA as well, so read this journal is very good, but also the Journal of Housing and the Built Environment and Housing Studies. So a lot of things and a lot of perspective from which he can contribute to our debate today. We asked him to give a speech, and he immediately replied, giving us two options, a long lecture or something more interactive based on a dialogue between all the colleagues involved. And we said, okay, the second probably is a very nice way to spend the afternoon together, more or less in the mood of the morning, so an open dialogue between scholars. We will have 3 steps in this presentation, so Ivan will address 3 different points of view in his speech: the anatomy of the COVID shock, the birth and death of urban innovations and expectation, and we will have Marco Cremaschi here commenting. We don't have Annalisa Boni because she's sick. She fell sick yesterday and she apologized for not being able to be with us. Then a second step is about the role of EU in the recovery, ambitions and disappointing outcomes, and we will discuss it together with Pietro Reviglio, Eurocities, here, and Simone Omborn on the other side. I will thank them all at the end, but I thank, of course, in advance very quickly, but we will have time to thank everybody. And then the first step will be to enter in the conclusions and what can we learn from the COVID episode in regard to emerging polycrisis of today. Laura Colini and Carlo Celamare are there, but they will come on the stage very soon. And the 5 actually, will animate the debate, so feel free to enter into the discussion, even if we have some slots already assigned to each of you. We can also collect some questions from the public, so there will be 5 minutes for some question from the public for each session. So if you have some question to ask, to propose, or some comments, consider that there is some time also for that. We hope this will be a lively session, and I thank you very much, Ivan, for accepting the invitation, for giving us his time and also his ideas and reflections about the current time for, you have your microphone, okay. And also for listening all the morning in Italian English and following the debate.
Yeah, I need this is forward. Yeah.
Green is forward.
Yeah.
I think they are changing the
okay. Until they changed the presentation, it was already too much about myself, but I have to add one thing. It started in June 1989. Together with my colleague Joseph Hegedűs, we were coming back from a conference in Paris. By that time, we already published a few things and we were presenters. And if you are up in the air, it was the Malev. Do you remember Malev? This was an airplane company once. It went bankrupt. After the second small bottle of red wine, your ideas become really light and innovative, and we decided to establish our own company. And this was the birth of Metropolitan Research Institute. 3 weeks after landing, in September, MRI started to work before the Iron Curtain collapsed. And we are still existing, which is not nothing, as Hungarians say. We are, as a completely independent small research entity, we are looking at what happens in different parts of Europe. And so these experiences will be included into this presentation. And the second small remark, I was really astonished about the morning meeting here. I had help to understand what you are talking about. But this openness of Italian research entities working together and creating an independent observatory monitoring the recovery fund, it is completely unimaginable in Hungary. And also in some other parts of Europe, that these entities work together, they work almost for free, if I understand well, they give their energy, the government or the public sector gives them the data, which is also something which is really missing in other parts of Europe, and the public sector is open to the suggestions or ideas for these research entities. So congratulations to this thing. I was really impressed. Now, if we come to the talk, I think, as Valeria already told, COVID is a very interesting laboratory. It was a shock, and everyone had to stop for a second, also physically in their home, and rethink life. And this episode is now over, and we have to think about what happened, how Europe reacted on it, and what this story tells us about the future of Europe. Now, let's talk about the first part of the presentation, the anatomy of the COVID shock, the birth and death of urban innovations and expectations. We all know that COVID was really a shock, and people had to stay at home. In fact, also municipal leaders had to stay at home. But then a lot of things happened immediately, and these first interventions were about public space. And obviously the reason was to give more room for walking, biking, leisure activities, taking away place for cars. The first cartoon is, I think, very interesting, which shows that how stupid our cities are. If we just take out the place what cars are using, almost nothing remains for those people who are living in the city. So it was very logical to take cars away from the streets and give the streets back to bikers. And I think this is a drawing about Milan, about redesigning streets. I don't know whether it still exists. Yeah, is it still? Does it look like us that? Okay, very good. Congratulations. And this is another picture about Porto Alegre, where they made a lot of interventions also in public space and making even a very dull crossing into a much nicer urban environment. This is the story about playing streets in Berlin. If a group of parents went to the local administration and they said that we will take care, the local administration closed the street, and the parents were looking on the kids, and cars couldn't enter the street. So the playing streets. And this is an example of Vilnius, where they also took away place from the cars and handed it over to bars and restaurants. And at that time, interestingly enough, they also introduced a program that please come to our capital city from other parts of the country. So internal tourism, because international tourism was completely stopped, but you could go to your capital city and look at it as a foreigner. So these were very interesting programs. Of course, these were controversial interventions, because to make a proper change in public space needs a lot of time and needs a lot of discussions, a planning process with many consultations. On the other hand, these tactical urbanist interventions were done in a very quick way, even in the total absence of public consultations. I will show a few slides about that, but first, how does a real project look like? This is Vienna, Maria-Hilfer-Straße. Up on the left, you can see how it looked like earlier. You can see how it looks like now. It took 3 years for the Viennese administration to make all the discussions, to talk with everyone, having a small local referendum, which they almost lost. 52 to 48, they won it, and now 90% of people love it. So it's a very difficult process. They almost overplayed it. So to talk for 3 years about something, people really lose the belief that this can happen. So these kind of interventions which were done during COVID, they are threatened now because life goes back to the previous normal. Here we can see the bike lane in Budapest in Grand Boulevard, which took away one lane from cars, which is heavily debated now in Budapest. Even the minister said that the mayor of Budapest is chasing car drivers. You know that Budapest is in opposition to the Orban government. This is also something which I have heard about the Tempo 30 problem in Bologna. And you also have ministers who are saying that you are chasing car drivers. So unfortunately, this political behavior is quite well known. This bike lane still exists, but in some cases it goes up to the pavement. So a kind of compromise had to be found, but it still exists. A very interesting example from Athens, where during COVID they made a very brave intervention and they created a huge bike lane called the Great Walks. Now it is threatened because it became clear that not too many bikers are using it. Of course, it is 40 degrees in summer in Athens, so if you bike in 40 degrees, then really hat off. So this gives enough munition for car drivers to say that this is for nothing. So there are also discussions going on about that. And here is the story of Rue de Rivoli, which is very interesting. A almost 3 kilometer long street which has been closed down for cars by Anne Hidalgo during COVID. Then there was some kind of uncertainty, and you can see that 2 lanes of cars exist in the middle picture. But after she won the second election, now it is only, I think, 1 lane for cars, and the rest is for bikers. So it is not easy to protect your intervention if COVID is over. Here you can see New Delhi. I think this picture is quite well known. Before COVID, during COVID, and if we put the first picture on the third place, then it could be after COVID. So it was a room, a short room in the time when New Delhi people could see the clouds. They don't see it anymore. And here is a Greenpeace statement downwards which says that air pollution is as high or even higher than before COVID it was. And just to close a few streets is not enough. We have to do something against the cars. So we must implement real long-term solutions instead of just temporary ones. So this was the public space. Easy interventions, some of them remained, some of them disappeared. But what happened with the social consequences of the pandemic? You can see the left-hand guy, he is not able to work from home. And you can see the right-hand side, people who are really in dreadful position, and they were really who suffered the COVID the most. So what kind of local social and housing interventions happened during COVID? Many things happened. Social assistance systems were introduced. Here is the example of Barcelona, or the Spanish government introduced the guaranteed minimum income system. Assisting youth unemployment, Vienna introduced a scheme. Eradication of homelessness. Now this was very interesting. In one of the conservative countries of Europe, in the United Kingdom, they really removed all homeless people from the streets. They made a decision that bread and breakfasts and the empty hotels, they have to accommodate homeless people. And there were a few months where you couldn't see homeless people on the streets of the United Kingdom. We couldn't imagine that this can happen, especially in that country, and it happened. Of course, this is also over. Now you can see again homeless people in the United Kingdom. And also increasing affordable housing. Another effect of COVID was budget deficit. And I think here the important word is the scissor effect, which means that the expenditures of local government increased a lot because they had to deal with things which they did not earlier. On the other hand, their revenues decreased. So more expenditures and less revenues. In most countries of Europe, the local governments were begging the national government for help. And I think it happened in many countries. I assume also in Italy, but for example in Austria, the Austrian government gave 2.5 billion euros to the local governments just to survive this situation. I know only about one country, and this is Hungary, where the central government used this opportunity to take away money from local governments. They said that you have to have a kind of solidarity contribution to the public interventions which we are doing. So they took away the money, and then they gave it back to those local governments which are loyal to the government, not to those who are in opposition. So there is at least one case where this situation was misused against local governments. So we can say that COVID is probably over, but a massive global recession can come afterwards. Now, what are the long-term effects of the crisis? And this is the last sub-point of the first topic. Existing inequalities are growing further. They are growing imbalances between frontline workers and highly skilled in home offices. Housing prices are increasing everywhere. In this situation, radical ideas are emerging in many parts of Europe. Services should be available for everyone, and there are also ambitious political agendas in some cities developed during COVID. Building back better was a kind of slogan at that time. We should not go back to words for a neoliberal economic answers of the problem, but we should take the crisis as an opportunity to transform economies and societies into a radically positive direction. Emerging idea was the universal basic services, and you can even see a quote of Emmanuel Macron, March 2020, so it was probably 1 month after COVID broke out, and he said that without condition of income, course of profession or welfare state, not cost of burdens but precious good, essential assets, there are goods and services which must be placed outside the laws of the market. I don't know whether he still says this, probably not, but at that time he said it. And we have to have a look finally on teleworking, because this was one of the most concrete consequences of COVID after the big lockdown was over. There are some figures here. Probably the fourth point is interesting. In America, those people who work from home is now 18% of the population, 28 million workers by the end of 2021. This is highly selective things. Some people can work from home, others not, and there are also a new gap emerging. You can download this presentation, but I think it's very interesting to show what is the reality from 1.5, 2.5 or 3 days per week at home. What is the reality, what is the expectation of the employers, and what is the expectation of the workers. And if I look at Italy, then I would say that it is now less than 1 day at home in average for workers in Italy. Employers would say that one day would be okay, but Italian people say that they would stay 2 days at least at home. So this is a kind of fresh result. And obviously teleworking has potential spatial effects. First, people said that because you can telework, you will go out to live in nowhere, to leave the dense cities. It was very interesting to see that if people really moved out to small places, middle-class residents, middle-class people, they soon discovered that there is no very good internet there. They cannot find a cleaning lady for their flats. It is difficult to put the kids into good schools and kindergartens. So they went back to the big cities. Not so easy to escape from the large cities. In the inner cities, the large office buildings became very problematic, and also the service providers for these city center places became in trouble. So this is the summary and the last slide before Marco comes in with his ideas. Did cities lose against the suburbs? I would say no. Urban life is back. The dense cities are working. Some people say they become even denser than they were before. Did cities become less car dependent, more healthy? I would say maybe a bit, but there is no dramatic change. If you look at the car use in cities, then it is quite dense. Did cities become more equitable? Not at all. So these original ideas raised during COVID, they did not prove very good. Housing prices are increasing, and there are heavy social spatial effects of teleworking. The revolutionary ideas of building back better vanished totally. You don't find them anymore in open speeches. And many of the local innovations have been rearranged by today as if nothing has happened. So there are some bike lanes remaining, but otherwise these dramatic changes have been eliminated. Why is that? Why are mayors not brave enough to make these promises valid? Because they don't get the support of the population, of large parts of the population, and sometimes they don't get the support from their national government, as the case of Italy and Hungary clearly proved. So it is not easy to make decisions for better, even if you want to do it, because you are going for re-election and you don't want to ruin your own future. So this was the first part, and Marco, the word is yours. Please tell me if I was wrong.
Buongiorno a tutti, una parola in italiano solo per ringraziarvi, sono commosso di essere qui dopo tanti anni in mezzo, diciamo, alla mia famiglia di partenza. I share very much what Ivan has been saying about the general trends on the policy making after the COVID, and if I had to add just one single comment, I would say from a Paris and French perspective that COVID has never existed. We completely forgot the lesson, so we are back to business as usual. But trying not really to provide my own ideas, but to give some contribution to the line design, to the red line designed by Ivan, I would add something comment starting from Paris. So what is permanent, what is not permanent? Many things are not permanent, that's the list of what has happened and disappeared. What is slightly more permanent? We were talking about Sparks Barlumi this morning, isn't it? What is slightly more permanent? I think there is a great and important element on the realm of discourse and narrative, but it has, which is probably a bit abstract, but I have to put into the conversation. On the notion of density, you know, density has been indicated as a culprit of COVID for a long time. And eventually, a lot of people and journals and newsmakers were expecting an exodus from cities toward the countryside, which didn't happen. Still, I mean, there is a narrative which is against density, which is taking place. This narrative, to make short a long story, is the one of the 15-minute city, which is completely contentless kind of approach. It's better it's academic shit, but that is another story. The 15-minute city, but funny enough, in Rome, the 15-minute city is applied in Tufello, which is one of the suburbs, faraway suburbs of the city, which is sort of, you know, paradigmatic. Everybody's talking about the 15-minute city, and why? I think this is something that should be assumed as an academic question. Why such a need for a new paradigm, which is the opposite of the notion of density? And the answer is, in my view, is the problem of sociality in city and a more inclusive way of living together. And that is something that COVID has made a permanent questioning of politics. If this is true, this my interpretation is true, the point is that policymakers have been given in cities very eclectic answer. They did everything. They did the bike line, they did also the opening of cafes and bars on the public space, they did some of co-working and co-housing support for decentering health offices. They did everything for the short moment. What is becoming more mainstreamed, in Paris at least there are a couple of elements which are being mainstream, which are interesting. And they, to some extent they go in the direction of the 15-minute city, to some extent they go in the opposite way. The two elements I would like to quote here are, first, the idea of the green city, of a more convivial urban spaces, which are not the streets, have become paramount. And so the new plans of Paris, which has been presented in November, has been renamed the bioclimatic plan, just to give you an idea, and is trying to foster an increase of 40% of green areas in a city which has no green areas at all. So, these green areas, that's the interesting part, are the green areas which are envisaged by the new plan, are a collection of very disparate stuff. Now, the school courtyard, the green roofs, green fish, whatever is linear somewhere, and we can, all the railways line, whatever, a combination of a totally crazy world of different pieces of land put together to make this 40% of the surface of the city, which is going to provide refrigeration, water, shaded areas, and eventually green space for conviviality. This seems to be slightly more permanent, and I think that it should think about what is the notion of the social city again. No? We tend, and why it's contradictory? Because the other tendency is precisely the opposite, is to foster again the density in city. And the city of Paris has been successful. For those, I suppose there are a few even here that are not expecting anymore any difference between right and left. The city of Paris has been producing new social housing in the last 20 years, and it has doubled the size of the public sector in the city of Paris, from 10% to 23%. So this has been a permanent, it's not due to COVID. I mean, this has been the permanent engagement of the last 4 administration. This goes in the other direction, no? It's not the green city anymore, it's another way of socializing the city. This is part, however, this is eclectic approach. Now they are trying to bring together these two different kinds of policies. And one of the questions is whether we are producing the right quality of flats, of houses, condition. And what does it mean? That we have to change approach, not anymore flats, not anymore small flats. In France, they are far smaller than in Italy. Not anymore standard small flat, the usual bedroom, kitchen, whatever, but something different. What is different, again, that is open to questioning. Common rooms, green roofs, communal spaces, co-housing to some extent, maybe, or new different form of housing for different typologies of family. So I will finish here to leave the room for discussion, but what I'm trying to say is that there are new questions, and these new questions, you're right, Ivan, are radical, and of radical importance. What is living together in a dense city today? That means different policies. Green spaces, maybe, but this is not the usual green spaces. It's not anymore park and gardens. It's something different. For instance, there are linear spaces, where you can bike and run. But what's the point I'm trying to make is also a second one. In these bike lanes, in this linear park, you walk, you bike, you ride a bike alone, in an individual way. And this is contradictory to the first policy attempt, and actually was a problem in Paris. As usual, there is a long tradition of investment in transport policies. Providing bike lanes has endangered the bus transport services. You see the contradiction for the public administration. I end up with an anecdote, nothing to do, but on the 15th city, you imagine Paris, the paradigm of the 15-minute city has become sort of official policy in a city where the state, the region, the city are spending 20 billion for the new transport systems, which is everything but a 15 minutes, it's half an hour kind of model. So this is so totally contradictory that should again raise some question.
Thank you very much, Marco. I wonder if there is any rising comment from the public, if we want there is some 2 minutes for that, or also from Laura and Carlo who are sitting on their small desk in the corner. Maybe I just can comment that on the one hand we could expect from COVID to dismiss the city, and there were voices raising these hypotheses about the future. But then we realized that what we were missing in the COVID and during the pandemic was the city. So coming out of the pandemic, the city was rediscovered as an asset. But probably, as you are trying to say, you have said, not trying to say, the issue is, the question is what kind of asset, no? Not necessarily the same as we had experienced before the pandemic. So this idea of revising the asset from its roots in a critical way, I think, is very important as something to reflect upon. Any reaction urgent from the public? Otherwise, we go to Ivan for the second part, or
okay, so the second part is what Europe did at that time. Now, I start with this cartoon. The guy, Europe, is threatened not to do, doesn't know what to do. There is a refugee crisis, terrorism crisis, Brexit crisis, debt crisis. This cartoon was done in 2016, in fact in a Chinese newspaper, which says that Europe has lost the way. And the environmental crisis is not even written on this signpost. It seems to be that Europe has really lost the way at that time. But suddenly, just a few days after Ursula von der Leyen was elected and the new Commission was elected, in December 2019, the Commission came up with the European Green Deal. And this European Green Deal is a new direction of Europe to go. And this kind of indicators that to decrease greenhouse gas emission by 40 or 50 or 55% and achieve climate neutrality of 2050, these assigned a way of Europe to go. And the European Green Deal is a whole system of very different and I would say well-developed programs. So my statement is that in 2019, Europe has found his way. But then came COVID. A few months later, COVID came. And what is interesting that just a few months after the breakout of COVID, the EU made two, I think, very important decisions. One came later because this program to bid together for the jobs, for the injections, this is something which was completely unknown earlier, that each country has the same chance to get those tools which will heal the society. But first it came the Next Generation EU program, an enormous amount of money. I don't go to the detail now because you know these details. So this graph only shows, maybe the figures are not completely correct anymore, but it is almost the same amount of money than cohesion policy, half grants, half cash payments or not repayable, so half grants and half loans. And this is the procedure. You all know that national reform programs have to be created. Important thing is that these national reform programs have to react on the CSRs, to the suggestions of the Commission, in what direction this given country should go. There is a priority of climate and digital transition, and then the allocation of money was very different from cohesion policy. Italy and Spain has got far the most money, and interestingly enough, Eastern Europe did not get too much. Because at the outbreak of COVID, there were not too many cases in Eastern Europe. Where did Chinese tourists fly directly? Not to Budapest and not to Prague, but to the central airports of Europe. So this was a quite different allocation of money. Now, let's see what this recovery and resilience facility, how did it work? And I will use two sources. One source was an analysis of universities. It was published in July 23. And they says that the new model of the Recovery Fund governance has a lot of very important novelties. One of the novelties is that national ownership of and commitment for the objectives, so the national level can really do what they want. More direct linkage between the reforms and the investments. You have to state what are your reforms, and the investments have to reflect your reforms. And very importantly, focus on policy outputs and not on the costs. So there are milestones prepared, and then if the milestones are achieved, then you get the money. You don't have to show how much money you have spent, which is a big difference compared to cohesion policy. In fact, someone from the Commission told me that if they would have done the recovery fund on the same way how cohesion policy work, they wouldn't have enough staff members in the Commission, because so many projects and so many expenditures, so this was more or less a necessity for them to create a new way of financing the program. But the same study says that there are very important weaknesses of the recovery fund, and the first one is exactly this new way of spending, a mechanical linkage of payments to the fulfillment of fixed milestones and targets. So you have to look with microscope on the milestone, and you have to compare the situation. And if there is some difference, then there is a problem, and it is not questioned anymore that the milestone was good or not, and whether the reform itself has been achieved or not. Inflexibility is a very important problem, that everything was signed in 2021, then it came a huge inflation, then it came a lot of things which have changed, and you cannot change the program itself because the milestones are carved in stone. The verification system makes it very, very difficult to take into account unforeseen or changing circumstances. And obviously, the almost complete lack of involving local stakeholders, local governments and also NGOs. Now, this is the second slide about the non-involvement of cities into this procedure. So in most countries, they were only very formal talks to cities. Italy is slightly an exception. The best examples told in literature are Portugal and Belgium, where they were talks to the local governments. Italy, Spain and Greece are middle fine, but the other countries almost completely ignored this kind of discussions. I prepared the chapter of the Visegrad 4 countries into a publication about which Pietro will probably talk, and this is really a assembly of very bad practices. So if you have a situation where the central government says that we will talk to you, please stay calm, 2 months later, yes, it comes the time when we will talk to you, and then 1 week before the final deadline, they publish a 350-page document, and they want your opinion in 2 days. This is not the way to talk to the local governments, especially if whatever you wrote on this discussion line, it was not taken into account at all. So this is a kind of lip service of talking to cities. The same happened also in Poland. The Czech Republic is an interesting case because they did the same until Babiš was the prime minister. Then Babiš was falling down. There is a new Czech government which is much more open to the cities, and they even managed to change some priorities of the program. And this comes to another issue: what happens if your government is changing? And I think Italy is a prime example in the opposite direction, I would say, that if the government changes, then new problems can emerge in this recovery fund. So Budapest was one of the cities which were absolutely neglected in the Hungarian reform program because Budapest became oppositional to the Orbán government. So Budapest launched an international movement lobbying for the large cities. It started with the Visegrad countries. Now it is more than 30 cities are the signatures, and they claim that the EU should open up to the cities and there should be direct programs from the EU to the cities, avoiding the national governments which are the gatekeepers. And if the national government is not friendly with the cities, then the cities get nothing. Now, this kind of direct contact with between the cities and the EU is unfortunately an illusion, because this would need a complete change of the basic documents of the EU, which the national governments have to agree, and they will never agree with this. Okay, and another thing which is very interesting, there are examples that this system can be done in a totally different way, and this is the Biden program. It's very interesting to have a comparison between the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 and the Recovery Fund of Europe. The American program is slightly bigger. It is 1.9 trillion US dollars. So it might be, we could say that it is twice as big as the European program. But the important thing is that almost 20% of this money was given directly to states and local governments. And this is an amazing difference, because they were quite big freedom given to states and local governments how they use the money for their priorities. 20 to 50% of the budget of an American city suddenly came as a check from the central government, saying that you know the best what were your problems during COVID, please do some changes, lasting changes in this regard. So many long-standing challenges and disparities could be healed by the local governments. This amount of money is just larger than something which you have to spend money on. You have to rethink your strategy, what you would like to go. So the last sentence shows Detroit getting 250 million, getting almost $500 million, spending 250 on city services and infrastructure, 105 million on jobs, 95 on blight remediation, so empty housing, empty areas, 45 million on digital divide. So the philosophy of the Biden program was totally different from that of the European Commission. Now the summary before other people are coming in, maybe with different opinion. The recovery fund method is not bad. It can work well if a few conditions are true. That the Commission's statements about a given country's program are right, and the programs have to work around that. If the national governments have high ambition. If the reforms and investments are determined in partnership with the stakeholders. And if the system of fixed milestones and targets are set up well with a view on the future and really adjusting to the reforms what you want to achieve. And if the conditions don't change dramatically. Now you can see that these conditions do not apply really in the case. Most of them are hurt in the case of most of the countries. And then there are also additional problems if the government is changing and the government has different priorities, or the government is simply misleading the European Commission. Again, an example from Hungary. The Hungarian government included into the original version of the recovery fund investments into universities. And you would say, okay, investments in universities, not so bad. But before that, they privatized the universities, and the universities are now under the direct control of the central government. In this case, it is not good. And the Commission was misled, but they discovered, obviously, this thing, and this had to be taken out from the program. So if these conditions don't apply, then the recovery fund is not working well, and cities do not receive the money which they would need to really address their own problems. If this is the case, then I think if there will be another recovery fund, then the EU should really take into account what America did and give a portion of the money directly to cities, or Europe should make it sure that decentralization works in the countries. And every national decision had to be discussed with the local players, and the local players have a say in what happens. So these are the two suggestions which are coming out from that.
Thank you, Ivan. So now we open this second space for discussion. We have two colleagues here, Simone Ombo on my right and Pietro Reviglio on my left. Simone Ombo is a colleague and from our universities, Urbanito University, so you know him very well. I don't know if you know Pietro Reviglio, so maybe I spend 2 words to introduce him very quickly for those who have not met him before. He works for Eurocities, so for European cities, the Association of European Cities, and in particular under the Governance and Policy Unit or something more, something similar. Maybe we'll add some words on that. But we asked also him to be here to implement a process of discussion with Eurocities that we are developing, that we have been developing during these months, and also for the future possible collaboration. He was coming back yesterday from Brussels together with Annalisa, so probably they exchanged some words also on today. So I give the floor to Pietro and then to Simone, correct? Okay?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. It's a big pleasure to be here with Urbanit and after having worked together, of course, on the European chapter, also with Annalisa Boni. As you were saying, I come from Eurocities. Eurocities is the association of big cities based in Brussels. And of course, we do a lot of, let's say, advocacy of representing the interest of cities with the European institutions. But we try to do that also by being as evidence-based as possible. Of course, we represent some interests. So very often what we do is consulting our members to understand what are their needs so that we are ready to, let's say, bring their interest forward. But what we also are trying to do more and more is to connect with research centers, with researchers in general, to also inform our policies with what is happening, in the academic debates, but also with think tanks and so on and so forth. So this is what we have done with the Urban Recovery Watch, which is the publication that Ivan was mentioning. The Urban Recovery Watch is a publication which brings together different contributors that have developed case studies on how different member states different national governments have used the recovery fund and have used it also to or not to transform cities. So we have 9 national examples that are covered, and what we have tried to do in that publication is to, with the authors, of course, is to connect not only, let's say, a narrative about the governance of these plans in the different countries, but also to look at some specific example case studies of cities. So the authors have have really gone in depth to understand how the different cities have used these funds. So, for example, for the case of Italy, Valeria, who wrote that chapter, worked very closely with Bologna and with Deputy Mayor Annalisa Boni to develop the analysis. So the idea of this publication was to inform the European institutions on the developments of the recovery plan, how the implementation is going. I should say that in maybe a little more than 1 month, the European Commission will publish its midterm review of the European Recovery Plan. As you might know, the Commission has, let's say a tradition of having evaluations to its policies. So this midterm review is an opportunity to see what is working and what is not working, and our publication was developed exactly to inform these debates. So maybe just a few words about this publication. As you can imagine, doing this comparative work is very difficult because very different, let's say, level of support were provided through the European Recovery Plan. So Italy was the biggest recipient of these resources, and we have other big countries like Germany that received just 1/10 of the resources that Italy received. So you can already see that it's difficult to compare these different examples, but still we try to find for similarities, and I should say that, okay, Italy is probably an unicum, but is also very similar to the Spanish example. The Spanish government is also getting a lot of resources. Interestingly enough, they first started from the grants, so they first requested 80 billion euros. They, after a bit of time, they learned that they could spend them and they could implement those resources, and then they asked for another 80 billion euros of loans. So they were a bit more cautious, so they didn't go for the full amount from the beginning. But it's very similar because it's a story that is quite similar. The case studies that we have in Spain is Barcelona, which is also a very interesting city that is very active in this discussion on the recovery plan. So maybe despite these difficulties, we try to come up with some joint challenges that we can see from all the plans, and we can see that despite big differences in all the cases that we analyzed, there were quite some time pressure for local authorities and limited consultation. This is no news. So in most cases, cities were not consulted, and cities, let's say, learned about the developments of the plans on a rolling basis. What we also saw is that there is quite a generic distribution of these resources. There has not been quite a strong attention to local integrated policies. So it's not just in Italy that ministries, let's say, developed calls for cities to apply. It's a story that it's shared by actually all the cases that we analyzed. So this approach was quite common. What we also saw is that most government also had territorially blind planning. Okay, the plans were centralized. There was a strong competitive approach to getting access to these resources, and no redistribution in mind. Also quite interesting for the Italian case, particularly also the complementarities between the national, the recovery plans and other European funds were not so clear, and they're quite a big challenge now that the cohesion policy has finally started. We see the difficulties of making it work. But what we also try to do in our publication is to assess what are some of the results that we can already see in our cities, and how European cities have tried to use these funds to really drive certain policies. And despite all the challenges, what we saw is that especially in those countries where cities, where there were many resources to redistribute and where cities got many resources, cities that, despite the challenge of, okay, going to one minister and the other and responding to this call and that call, they still try to bring everything together into something relative, as coherent as possible, integrated plans to really transform the city. So we saw that this is quite common for Bologna and for Barcelona, but also Nantes, which is in France, the case study that we had there. So there was this effort. Other challenges that we saw is that there is quite a strong problem of administrative capacity in many of these cities that have received a lot of resources. It's not just Italy that has problems. I could go on and on, but this is just to give you an idea of what are some of the common trends faced by European cities that are trying to implement these funds. I think maybe it's worth maybe taking a step back and trying to think the context in which Next Generation EU operates, and maybe also how it links with the broader, let's say, framework for public investments at the European level. Because as we discussed, I think, quite a bit this morning, okay, this is an extraordinary investment plan, and but what about after? What about after the recovery plan? We will have all these new infrastructures that have been built, that will require people to run those services. So how do we do it? And we see that the context at the European level is extremely worrying. Austerity is back. If it ever went away, but we see that the new, let's say, agreements on the EU economic governance are very problematic and will undermine the ability of local authorities to invest and to increase also current expenditure that is extremely important also to build the administrative capacity. So this is quite worrying. What we see at the European level, it's great, Ivan, you mentioned the European Green Deal and this very ambitious plan at the European level to really transform society, decarbonize the economy, and so on and so forth. In the past Commission mandate, the Commission really worked hard to develop so many legislations that will enable the Green Deal to become real, but the resources to then implement those changes, those transformations are not there. So we have again and again this process of devolving responsibilities to local authorities without providing the necessary resources. So the issue of unfunded mandates is as strong as ever, and it will become even more problematic in the future. It's important also to maybe bring in the discussion the challenges of the European Green Deal. Also, implementing the European Green Deal will be very difficult, and this Commission was very ambitious about it. We see the projections for the next European Parliament. Europe will go to the right. We don't know if they will be as ambitious with this, let's say, growth model for growth for Europe. Maybe things will change, but we fear, and our cities were extremely ambitious in the commitments for decarbonization, but we fear that local authorities and cities will be left alone implementing all these transformations. And there is a strong issue of equity around the European Green Deal that will become even more prominent in the debates about the European elections. We know that the transition is not neutral, the climate transition. We have a strong opposition between urban and rural areas that is growing, but we also see in cities new challenges also related to the need to renovate buildings and housing, and the effects of these renovations will be huge on the people that are struggling the most in our cities. We see that the effects of the European Green Deal, the decarbonization, the effects of the new investments with the recovery plans will will transform our cities and will bring some parts of the population out of society. So it will be quite challenging. So these are just some ideas to maybe think a bit beyond the recovery plan, but also to connect with some ongoing debates at the European level. And to finish, maybe very quickly, what we also did in our study is to develop some recommendations on how to improve the recovery and resilience facility. So we will present this to the European Commission in 2 weeks, and we have some short-term, let's say, recommendations on improving the way the plan can be implemented from now until the end. But we also have some more long-term recommendations that are about assessing how this model of investing, of providing public investment resources at the European level works for territories. It's very problematic, and we are very worried because soon the discussions about the next European budget in Brussels will start. They've started already. There is a huge debate on the future of cohesion policy, and it's no secret that the Commission is thinking about using the RRF model as the new way of delivering cohesion policy, so adopting some of the mechanisms of the RRF in cohesion policy. This means bypassing local governments, going away from multi-level governance and the partnership principle. So we're very, very worried. So we really hope to be able to push for a place-based approach in the future cohesion policy. This is where the debates are, and hopefully we will be able to count on the support of the academic community of researchers to develop good evidence that we can use to then advocate and defend cohesion policy. There are some good things about the RRF models. More performance-based can be good. Stronger links with reforms, if those reforms promote things such as fiscal decentralization, is great. But if then this is done without the territories, we are very, very worried. Yes.
Thank you very much, Pietro. I think the two last lines of Ivan were exactly on that point. So
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. And I participate to the Urbanit report, not in an evident position. I was near the engine in some way, and I was deeply influenced from the work I made with Gianfranco Viesti for recovering data and informations about how the scene was changing and developing time by time as the different messages and events were changing the field. So what I will tell you is in some way influenced from this strong personal experience, of course. And I want to react to the invitation of Ivan that is really stimulating me, and in some way I also connect with some ideas that was envisaging Pietro Reviglio just before me. And I think that there are something meanings that we have to take in consideration, that now we are more connected in Europe because we have a wider debt. And that is in some way is the first time that we have European debt. And this, about RRF, this debt is for 74% made from Italy. Nearly three quarters of the public European debt is produced from the Italian program. And this is also an important, really important thing, because the Italian PNRR is in some way led from the idea that the central point is money. And on this there is some connection between the Italian approach and some meanings in the European Union, because also at the European level there is the idea, I think, that money is central. But on the other side, we know that money is not enough. And sometimes money makes damages. If you don't find the proper way, the proper use of money. And so proper use of money is more important than money by itself. So this chance, the European program for recovery resilience facility can be also a big common school for self-learning of Europe in producing and addressing different policies and also new approaches. This can be something good, but up to now it is not, in my opinion. It can be in future, maybe, okay, so we see in Italy only a few cities had, almost no cities had the chance to cooperate producing the agenda. Although we have at European level the Urban Green Deal and the Europe 2030 agenda, that would be in some way the general sky, the point of view, the general point of view of the whole sustainable development of Europe. And so this is another contradiction. The European Union decided to have this Green Deal as the system of stars for driving and in some way going through the problems. But then the decision in the Italian program was to have different kind of regulations, and this is it's a problem because, and we see this when we see the good examples that we have. As we have seen in the morning, towns and cities that they had already an agenda and for urban development, so for sustainable development, they were able to adapt the agenda to the new items and for the new money that was in the line of new programs. And so it was possible. For Bologna is clear, but also for Florence that made a special general review about its agenda to in some way to connect it, to complement the two lines of general strategic plan and the specific strategic approach produced for resilience program. So this is also bringing us another aspect, and having a strategic framework for territorial coherence is really helpful, like in French example. In French there is no debt. The only money the French decided to have is the free expense, only free expense without problems for giving back that money. And the territorial coherence system that they have, that is, transcalar, vertical, in relation between the national, the territorial, and the local level, workly properly. So they didn't have any problem. When I told them, I had a discuss with them last year, and they told, I asked them, do you have problems about resilience facility? And they said, why? Problems? They didn't mean about any kind of problem, because they feel to be only on the part of the solution, maybe. And so a third line of thinking, and so with this I finish my little intervention, is that we have to think in general a different way of thinking about urban policies, because is emerging a new, stronger approach. We have back states that are bombing the cities. And so the function of attributing value in a financial capitalism, is not producing value by itself. It's more important in some way attributing value to things and processes. And so bombing is another way to you need not to attribute a value, but on contrary to cancel a value. And having so many financial resources, there is a problem to disrupt value. And war is one of the ways that is possible to use for disrupting value. Not only the present value, I can bomb the towns, but also future value. You have to reconstruct the towns after bombing them. You know what we are thinking about, what we are going to do as Europe after the war in Eastern Europe and so on. And so I think that there is a new coming up of an old contradiction between towns and not states by themselves, but the strategic thinking at the global level. So strategical thinking is that was, you know, do you remember, Valeria? We began thinking about the strategic approach to urban development, and now strategic thinking in some way is disrupting what we are trying to construct at that time. And so I think that Urbanit will have so much to more in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone. Yes, a reaction from...
Just a French reaction. Simone is perfectly right on recalling some of the important aspects of the recovery plan in France. Let me rephrase it in an even more provocative way. France is a very Keynesian. We have to spend 100 million before 26. I heard this morning that you are expecting 27 or 28. How confident are you? I wouldn't be so sure. In any case, they said, where we can spend money in 2 years, in 3 years? And the answer was easy. Tax exemption, 1/3, 33 million. Nuclear and railways, no? Big industries, one right to the center, the other one left to the center. Perfect. We are going to spend 1/3, 33 million in 2 big players, and retrofitting buildings, and that is everybody. No, you know, it's a sort of little bit for little something for everybody. But being a Keynesian state, they started from surprise, from schools and public health buildings. I guess the Partito Democratico and 5 Stelle didn't think that 110 could be applied to schools, to my surprise. But let me add a warning. I heard a lot of references to strategies and place-based approaches. This is a dead end. There is not any more places for strategies. 30 years are gone under the bridges. We have been talking about strategies and place-based approach for a long time. There is only one strategy in Europe, which is competitiveness. And place-based approach is just the local paint over the same strategy. And France is very effective. They have a strategies, which is Paris is the competitive city, and they have a place-based approach for the other 12 cities. And they provide a bit of social cohesion in the other cities to compensate for the strategic choice made at the center of the system. This is the strategies. There is no any other thing. And there are no alternatives. If you go to Palermo and Naples, you can't apply the first, you cannot apply the second. So yeah, I think there is a responsibility here for imagining something different, which are not, however, in the realm of either competitiveness or place-based, nobody knows exactly what.
Thank you, Marco, for this provocative addendum on France. Any reaction by your question? Of course, also Camilla Perrone and Gabriele Pasqui, which will intervene at the end if you want to jump in the discussion. So,
Maybe on the place-based provocation, I fully agree. I mean, place-based, it's something that has been discussed for decades. From the Barca report onwards, we've been talking about how to make a place-based approach really working at the European level, what it means to do good cohesion policy. But in a way, if you look at the PON Metro Plus, if you look at how the resources are provided to metropolitan cities, including Napoli and Palermo, you can see that there is a stronger redistributive element than we might have in the future if we don't have, again, a cohesion policy that has redistribution at its core. So it's just to give an example that things might get even worse. I mean, I fully agree. I mean, Europe is about competition. I mean, we don't have a social Europe, and we probably will not have a stronger social Europe in the next mandate. It will become even worse. But we have to at least keep what we have as much as we can.
Thank you, Pietro. So, shall we go for the third element of this afternoon discussion?
Okay, the last element, and this is really about about what can we learn from this short COVID episode. Now, I start with a cartoon. I like cartoons very much because they really express things. You can see on the left bottom a boat where people are sitting, and they say, be sure that you wash your hands and all will be well. But in the meantime, you see what kind of crises are emerging, and COVID is the smallest one among all of them. So what do we know about the future? A very important report came out just a few weeks ago, the Global Risks Report 2024, which was prepared by the World Economic Forum. And they use a very special method. They called together 1,500 global experts, and they asked what is their vision about the future. And future was meant within 2 years or within 10 years. And the results are really threatening. Today, for the next 2 years, only 30% of the people say that there will be a collapse within 2 years. But if we look at 10 years, which is 2034, not so far away, then almost 2/3 of the majority of the people who were asked say that there is a real risk of major collapse in the global systems. So we are facing something which we didn't face up till now. We don't know exactly where it will come from, although we have some assumptions, and this is another graph from the same report. The short-term challenges are coming from different sources. It is AI, extreme weather, societal polarization, cyber insecurities, etc. But within 10 years, the 4 biggest challenges are all environmentally linked. So there is a big chance, these people say, that within 10 years the world can collapse, 2/3 majority. Now, this is really a very different world what we are facing in the future. I found a very interesting talk, which was between 2 people. One of them is a green growth believer, and the other one is a degrowth believer. And this you can look at YouTube. And Keith Travers was the moderator of this event, because if we are heading to the collapse, should we trust green growth ideas, or should we accept that there is no other choice than degrowth? And these people were telling each other what is their opinion about the other one. So it's a very interesting. I have a few slides here. Obviously, green growth is something which says that we can fight climate change, avoiding a decrease in GDP. We will use less energy. We will reduce GDP, but carbon how to say, we will use less energy for cars and traffic, and we will also use less energy for the GDP production for industry. So it is possible to have a kind of better future which is less carbon intensive. And they also say that little more growth is needed because people need to see something which is developing. Some growth is needed to make it easier to solve the climate problems. And we cannot do the changes if the pie is decreasing. So these are their statements. What are the degrowth statement is? Degrowth says that there is a need for a planned and democratic reduction of less necessary production in rich countries in a safe and just way. It does not mean that the underdeveloped societies cannot develop. It is the rich countries which have to really change behavior and growth. The growth as an objective has to be abandoned, and the focus should be on equity, sufficiency, and human well-being. It is not the aggregate production what matters, but what we are producing, assuring that people have access to goods they require. And then there are some suggestions: decommodify public services to make them accessible to everyone. A bit stronger than Macron said, but they still say it, while Macron is not saying it anymore. Now, what is the political feasibility of these two ideas? The green growth person has very strong statements. Degrowth is disastrous for the climate change. The story of net zero is a story of hardship and misery. Taking away your car, your vacation, which people will not accept. And of course they say it can be done much easier in a prosperity narrative such as green growth. And they also say that it is hard to achieve societal consensus on degrowth. And if you really achieve it, then it is too late, because it will take so much time. What is the degrowth person saying? Key statements of green growth, the high carbon tax, they are blocked by the people who would lose on that due to less capital accumulation. It is not at all true that richer people can care more about the climate change. So degrowth is calling for policies which are critical, but they say that it is possible. The past of mankind shows that the decolonialization movement, the civic rights movement in the USA, the women's suffrage movements, they all changed societies. So now the degrowth movement will change society. The next question is, can degrowth be achieved within global capitalism? Here is a statement that capitalist countries are independent from each other. If you tax the rich here, then they go there. We all know that they are tax havens, etc. The answer is that a new thinking is needed. The World Bank and the IMF should give up to concentrate on GDP growth. They should work on fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which already exists but is weak. They have to introduce capital control everywhere, and otherwise countries can issue a currency for themselves to avoid that the capital coming from elsewhere is controlling their economy. Final reflections of this debate. I think it was very interesting. The two speakers agreed on the objectives. We need prosperity and fairness. The disagreement is how we can achieve this. The green growth people said that more income allows people to live better and technology assures less emissions. The green growth narrative is an easier way to go forward. Of course, if the promise of reduction in emissions is not achieved, then politicians will be voted down. But the green growth person said that a degrowth politician will never be voted in because the population does not accept these views. The degrowth person said that the green growth promises seem not to be feasible. not in a just way, obviously. Degrowth statements are more honest. It is a hard concept, but not easy to achieve. Political movements are needed to achieve it. We have to change our way of thinking. My final outcome was that both degrowth and green growth are very, very difficult concepts, and probably neither of them can be achieved in our society. But let's go further a bit. What can we do then? And again, in the World Economic Forum report, there is a statement that we need individual and collective actions, we need local strategies, we need international collaboration, and we need all of them together. But what is the effect of some actions on the environment? And this is the only slide I found in research, which says that on the right-hand side, you have actions which seem nice but make no difference. If you exchange your light bulbs, if you hang dry clothes, if you recycle, if you wash clothes in cold water, you make actions which you think are good for the environment, but they have very little effect. The biggest action to have an effect is having one less child, because we are overpopulated in this world. And if we have less people, then it is easier to change the world. And then live car-free, avoid one transatlantic flight, buy green energy, buy more efficient car. So this is the first result which showed me that what can an individual behavior go to, what makes sense and what not. Now, what is the present reality? The present reality is that any state interventions which go towards a more sustainable future are confronted with huge resistance from the side of the affected groups. Just remember the Dutch tractors on the streets. Now Germany is blocked by the agricultural providers. You remember the Yellow Vest movement in France, etc. International organizations also have difficulties to go into this direction. The taxonomy for sustainable activities has been approved, which means that what are those activities for which the commercial banks can give a loan. But Germany lobbied in natural gas, France lobbied in nuclear developments. So all these things which are told to be not really sustainable are in because of the compromise. And the Global South is blocking that renewable energies should become the sole way to go, and they are afraid that polluting outdated technologies, if they are forbidden, then the South is over. It is very interesting that in such a situation, radical ideas emerge. We can call it eco-terrorism. Probably you have heard about the tire extinguishers who are mainly going to the SUVs. The SUVs became a symbol. Private jets and SUVs became the material symbol of unsustainable living. And this movement is trying to achieve an understanding of sustainable development, but also tries to influence people. Unfortunately, people will not bike if their tire is extinguished. They will not vote for the green anymore. So the effect of these movements might be just the opposite. Anyway, I like these posters. There's a movement called Brandalism, and they have these posters that Toyota Beyond Zero means flogging guzzlers for decades to come, or another one which says sexy ads, smoking fumes, hot profits, or the third one, Toyota Land Crusher, dominate life. So this kind of new types of posters which are really saying that the motor industry is really going into the wrong direction. And you know that half of the new cars which are produced now are already this kind of SUVs. So what then? What then if neither green growth, if green growth doesn't solve the problem, if degrowth is politically not feasible, if international organizations are unable to achieve their their aims. So what is the light at the end of the tunnel? And I found two ideas, and one is bottom-up democratically developed resilience. We already have in our societies many groups which really believe that life has to be changed. Maybe they go out from the large cities, they don't have a car, they look at how much waste they produce and what kind of things they eat, etc. These movements can show that the quality of life does not depend on material assets. So there are some starting points from which life could be changed. Another idea is the modern monetary theory, which says that countries can issue their own currencies. If they issue it, then they cannot run out of money. So if they spend more and more on energy retrofitting, for example, and the outcome is retrofitted home, so there is an outcome, then even if they have a huge debt, they will not get bankrupt. This is a new theory which is criticized by traditional economists, and I'm not sure that it is 100% correct, but this says that countries can do something into a sustainable way, and they should not be limited by their own short-sighted views about public debt. In fact, neither of these ideas are easy to implement in quick time. So these are just two emerging ideas. COVID was a shock-type crisis which helped such ideas to disseminate, to distribute. But probably we need more crises, we need harder crises, and we need longer periods of catharsis that these ideas go through. COVID was not enough. We were shocked for a few months, and then everything went back to the earlier normal. So this is my last slide, really. A not very positive summary, I would say. We face intensifying crises, growing climate change challenges, more frequent and more dangerous shocks already in the near future. Remember, 1,500 people say that within 10 years there will be a global and very big collapse of existing systems. International awareness is growing, but slowly, and a quick worldwide efficient agreement seems to be unrealistic. Potential way out is innovative degrowth and sustainably oriented public policies. Catalyzers of that can be the new bottom-up sustainable communities supported by cities. These communities are in our cities. It is our responsibility to give them more and more opportunities and help them in their new ideas. And in fact, the EU should pay more attention to these new local actors and those cities who are supporting these new local actors, because they might show the way out from the problem. In fact, cities should fight for their better position as supporter of the new ideas and actors. So this is a potential task for our cities, not to run for more development, not to run for larger money, but for the good ideas and try to support these good ideas. Okay, so now this is the...
Thank you, Ivan. This is our task to react to this last part. I think both Carlo and Laura have something to reflect upon and difficult words to be said about that, but the floor is yours. Maybe I can mention that Carlo Cellamare and Laura Colini worked as well as authors of the chapter of the report, and in particular they've been working on the housing policies perspective, let's say. Carlo Cellamare is again part of our member of our community. Laura Colini has been working for a long time at European urban policies together with Ivan, so we are very happy to have this final round of discussion and to open after to the wider public and for the conclusions of Camilla and Gabriele. Who wants to start with these hard questions?
Okay, first. So thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity for a discussion, common reflection. And thank you very much to Ivan for the presentation. I appreciate it a lot, and I've never seen before this the final slide, but I agree a lot with especially one point that I would share with the reflection and to have your opinion about it, because I'm working a lot on the idea that catalyzers should be the new bottom-up sustainable communities supported by cities with appropriate innovative policies. And I think, yes, we need a great change in the way we can see the model of development. And so we can see that innovative ideas are coming from those communities that are working on the local situations, on the local territories, trying to develop such innovative perspective. We are working a lot on the housing problems, so we have seen a lot of interesting work by cooperatives, trying to introduce an integrated approach, so giving housing, but giving even services, equipments, and a perspective of the reduction of the energy impact and environmental impact, and trying to develop sociability, and so on. Just to give one example, and there are a lot of examples of this kind in our cities, in the neighborhoods, all around Europe, not only in Italy. There are some interesting examples in the management of the water cycle in Bruxelles through the Bruxelles for Law experience. And then there are energy communities, and there are, we are experimenting mutualistic networks that are developing communitarian welfare, and so on. There are a lot of interesting examples. But it is so hard to transform such experiences in a public policy. So I think we need a sort of great alliance between such perspectives, such experiences from below, and the local authorities and the institutions, because it is not so easy to realize public policies starting from this point, taking into account what Marco was already saying. The central point is the competitiveness and the general position of the European Union is this kind of perspective. So how can we implement such new perspectives in this general context? So the first point is we need a sort of alliance. And the second point is that in many cases we have many local authorities that are trying to develop such a collaboration. We have some interesting experiences, but we have again some difficulties that are related firstly to the organization of the public administration, because already in the morning we have said something about it, and because the organization of the public administration is related to specific competencies, so it is so hard to realize integrated policies and to realize coordination. So there are some interesting experiences that are trying to develop such a perspective, but it is not so easy because the specific organization of the administration is of another kind. So they are looking to administrative procedures, they are looking to specific competences, so they have to achieve a target, so that they have a sort of prestational approach. So in our case, we are working through a sort of hackering of the public policies to realize such perspectives. And this is the kind of work we are doing, trying to develop such idea of supporting the experience. So we have to hacker the public policies that are develop the sort of general perspective, the European Union level, and they are so far from the local conditions and the real use, the need, and an integrated approach, so that we have to do this kind of work, try to taking some different parts of different policy to realize an integrated policy for supporting this perspective. And then I think even there's a sort of a lack, I would say in this way, a lack of sovereignty by the local institutions. So that if they want to realize something in this perspective, they have to face with stronger powers, and so that they have some difficulties, so that we have some contradiction, as even Giovanni said today in the morning. So they are doing something on this one way, and they are doing something mainstream on another way. So I think it's so hard. So that, for instance, I am working with the Forum of Diseguaglianze and Diversities, Inequalities and Diversities, and we are working a lot on the idea that we have to develop a sort of capacitation of the public administration, the local institutions. So we have to work to support public institutions to work in this direction. That's a central point for the forum. So, and then just a final point is a so general question. So I know that it's a too hard problem, but I think in some way we have to understand better the sense of institutions nowadays, because there are institutions that were born during the other centuries, so the modern state and traditional democracies, they seem not at the highness of the problems we have to face with. So that I think that's a very deep problem, but I think that we have a lot of time to solve such questions. But I would like to have your opinion on these questions. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this with Ivan. I think we had many discussions like this many times. It is about everything. You know, you just start from an urban perspective and you really go to rethinking how society works and how to save the world. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, to be honest, right away. So I may share some reflection, Ivan, on the things that I observed, because you used the lenses of the COVID, before and after COVID, and to learn from innovation towards the future. So my observation of the period of the COVID is that I haven't seen so many innovations. I will dismantle the concept of a little bit the concept of innovation. If I think of the area that I observe the most, which is related to housing, so you have seen a fluctuation of the purchase of housing, more or less, but the prices have been growing up, always. And if you see the sense of the measures that I've considered innovative, like the one that you mentioned, the zero homeless policies in Britain, yes, there was a task force to make it function, but we know that in the UK, they paid homeless people to leave the cities. Really paid, definitely, and not to mention all the urban designs that have been made all over British cities to discourage homeless people to be there. And then if we see what the measures that have been considered innovative, the International Union of Tenants have listed some of them, OECD has also listed some of them all over the country. So we had eviction ban, rent payment postponements, temporary reduction, rental freeze, and so on and so forth. And when we were debating them, we saw them as innovation. For God's sake, we waited for some of them forever, because we know that they have been, the fact that these regulations were not there, the fact that the contract were not made stable, they have created the damages that became only more visible through the crisis. So the crisis actually made visible inequalities that were crystallized, deeply entrenched in the unequal society. So what has been an innovation at that point was not really that innovative. And so that's what in a certain way, I agree with what Marco was saying, that you had like this kind of frenzy of tactical and eclectic experience. Some of them, they are very welcome. Yes, we do welcome many more bike lanes, we welcome public spaces, but this doesn't change the way the publicness of the public space, or in terms of public policies, has changed. So if I have to say what we may learn in terms of creating resilience, of being prepared to continuous shocks of this policy, more crisis. If I make an example along the line of the topic that I was touching upon, so you see that, for instance, in Finland, they adopted, as you know, national policies for housing first. And we know that has worked. But not only that, they had a structure supporting people at risk of eviction. Aura is one of the main good examples. They really do outreach to avoid and provide support so that people lose their homes. And these, if you have this kind of and now they are innovative, structural policies at work at national level, so that do not challenge whether that's to be done at a regional level or a local level. It's a national, functional, well-functioning policies which is based on the right of inhabitants and human being. So you don't have to challenge in terms of innovation. So you are already resilient, you are already prepared to this kind of policy shocks. So my points are, maybe we have to dismantle the narrative of innovation. It is, I think I'm in line with one of the papers that has been published during the COVID by Storper and Florida, even if I don't agree with Florida on many things, that would say it is naive to say that we can really learn from that shock of the COVID to have a better society. Because we need more structural and innovative, but really innovative, right-based type of policies which are adopted also at national level. And there are examples in certain topics that they are functioning. And now that you open up the area on, the growth, on green growth, this is a huge topic which I don't feel I have good knowledge of. But I think that I have a friend, I think she's great researcher. She's Julia Steinberger. She's also a professor and activist, and she got a ERC fund for millions of euros. And they are doing research on the post-growth deals. So it's not green growth, it's not degrowth, but it's post-growth deals. And so they look at new post-growth economies under different perspectives and creating different types of pacts between institutions and civil societies in the way that within limits of our way of living, not radically changing, not buying the argument of the green growth guy saying, everything has to be reduced, you don't travel anymore, you don't have access to the benefits that we gained over many generations, but we also have to think of a post-growth economies that they allow us to have a more conscious way, or more conscious behavior towards climate change. We have to think of, I think, the way economies works. If you think that the real estate sector has 3 times it's valued 3 times of the world GDP. So if you think how the mechanisms of inequalities creation go through that is enormous. So I think if you want to look for good ways or interesting other venues beyond the dichotomies of degrowth and green growth, I would say the post-growth deal, it's a good way to do research. And the other point is, let's look what kind of innovation do we buy, and are they really innovation learning from the crisis? So I don't have an answer, but I provided other questions. Thanks.
So we can either leave time to Ivan if he wants to react, and comments also from the public and from Camilla and Gabriele, if they want to join us. Yes.
Yeah, very, very short reactions on Carlo. Yes, I understood that sometimes we have illusions about innovative local governments because we see these fancy good practice collections, and I was also working for Urbact, and we were looking for good practices, and we have to understand that these are for the moment exceptions, and we have to look into the structural problems of local governance, as you mentioned. So I totally agree that we have to disrupt, to a given extent, the present functioning of local governments. But again, who will disrupt it? So how these ideas are coming? But I agree. What Laura said about post-growth economy, post-growth thing, in fact, the degrowth people say that they think in that way, because they say that degrowth doesn't mean that you don't live as good as earlier. It means that you have different aims, you have different positive images about the future, and not the existence of a car, of a flight is the positive thing, but that you can grow that, and you can enjoy a lot of things. So I don't know what is the difference, but these ideas are not known, and I think if we have to bring in one more idea is the media. The media is really distorting these ideas. So if the media talks about degrowth, they only talk about the hardships and about that you will not be able anymore to travel to the Canary Islands. But what the hell do you have to go to the Canary Islands for? You can find so many things much closer, and you can get your pleasure in the same way, more or less. So the media itself is a very important thing. But I think the audience is more important.
Of course, if the panel wants to react, we try to be compact. I guess some people have to take the train to be back in their own cities, but I think we have at least a few minutes for reactions, and 10 minutes can be probably fine for everybody. Yes. But.
No, I don't want to challenge Ivan on this topic. I think this opening is very broad and very interesting. I think it's crucial, but like Laura, I probably not be able to give an answer. Still, I want to make an addition, if I may, which is last time I was working on these topics was just before leaving Italy. At the end of the experience that you all know, the local development story in Italy, which ended not so well, let's be honest. And my conviction at the time, that's the reason why I'm suggesting here the same idea, is that we were going towards a sort of a zoning of development models. And I think that your final suggestion may be reframed also into this spatialization of development zones. This is an old idea in economy. Basically, we live in a world where one single country is providing all the industrial products, China, and possibly in the future there will be, however, would be another country will be sufficient to produce all the agricultural stuff, probably Egypt in this economic model. So the issue is what we do with the leftovers. And there are two options. One is biodiversity reserve areas, which probably would worth to pay for, even for the Davos kind of people. Yeah, why not? Let's go do skiing on the alpine resorts. Let's keep the alpine resorts in somehow nice places. And then the Indian reservations. And the Indian reservations are probably for all of us. And I think the problem we have to think about is the political trade-off between these four economic models. And the problem right now is that they are not recognized. They are all mixed together, and so they are conflictual. And as far as they are conflictual, we are not able to speak the language. We are not able to pick up the options, to select whether we want to stay in a way or the other. And we are continuously interfering one with each. I think a lot of people here will belong to more than one spatial socioeconomic zones in this moment. And what I'm trying to suggest is that maybe zoning the growth process could be helpful in finding also a political solution and avoid sterile competitions. But it's just a line of thought.
Maybe very quickly, because I know time is running out, but just to reflect on the post-growth ideas, just to say that even at the European level, cities are, let's say, well, starting to think about this and experimenting with this. I mean, we know a bit Amsterdam, the donut economy models and all these kind of things. And just to say that 2 days ago, in Brussels, the Belgian presidency, the Belgian president of the European Council, organized an event where 40 mayors signed a declaration in which there were also discussions about GDP as the measure of progress in society. And it's quite interesting to see that, of course, from progressive cities, there is a bit an effort to challenge the status quo on how we measure progress in society and how we measure well-being. And of course, if you don't measure it, you cannot see it. So it's very important that there is a trend to experiment with new ways of measuring progress and driving policies based on a multidimensional understandings of progress and well-being. So I just wanted to bring this up because there is something happening. Of course, it's with all these social innovations that we've been talking about, these are the exceptions, and they are very much also under the framing of the dominant structure, so they're not, let's say, main alternatives that you can mainstream that easily, but it's something that is ongoing. And of course, the European Commission will not promote a post-growth economy for the moment. Just to say that the Green Party organized a big conference in the European Parliament just a few months ago, and the official position of the Commission was very critical, and it was interesting to see that the audience in the conference was booing the European Commission Gentiloni, who was not there but gave a speech from remote saying that, of course, the European Commission is for green growth, not degrowth. So I think it's worth sharing.
Thank you, Pietro. Any other additional reaction? No? No, not for the moment. So what I would first say is a big thank to Ivan for provoking this debate and for his lecture. I think it was a very interesting way to hear from him and to share the discussion. So I would make an applause to Ivan and all the panelists for this discussion. Thank you very much to all of you. Now I would leave the floor to no, we can stay here as a chorus for
Yeah, thank you so much. It's late, so I will give only some very short comments about the interesting discussion we had this afternoon. First of all, thank you to Ivan and to the panelists. I don't want to go in the last discussion because I'm not expert and I'm not enough smart to discuss really degrowth or post-growth. The only thing I say is that I don't know what exactly the European Commission says, but I'm sure that there is no Italian city that has any idea of putting this item in its agenda. So it could be interesting, but in this moment, it's completely out of the agenda for many complicated and different reasons. One of them is that there are some perceptions of economic problems and so on and so forth in which the answer that is based on the idea of degrowth or post-growth is not usable for many political parties, not only right-wing but also left-wing. I was wondering how to use Ivan Tosic and colleagues' reflection and how to connect this discussion with the discussion we had this morning, because this is one point. How to put this international discussion inside the kind of discussion we had this morning that was quite different in the approach. And my point is, first of all, to reflect on the fact that we need a discussion like the one we had in the afternoon, also to enrich the kind of discussion we had this morning. Because in this moment, in the public sphere, the discussion about PNRR is a kind of discussion that says, okay, we are not able to keep the target. We are in late, it's all about efficiency, nothing about effectiveness. No clear reflection on the connections between the general objectives and targets of the European Union through the mechanism of the Recovery Fund and before the Green Deal, and what also in our PNR was written. I give an example. In our PNRR, we have also a part that is about reforms. That is important in PNRR, apparently. Which is the discussion about the reforms in this moment in PNR? Are huge reforms of the the civil justice, reform about the public administration. Which is the discussion in this moment? Nothing. Everything is about the possibility to save the money, really, because of the problems of time and so on and so forth. Second aspect, I think that we need a general discussion that can be enriched by observation like those you propose, also because the situation now is completely different from the situation we had when the PNRR was starting some years ago. None of you quoted the fact that now we are in a war situation. There is the war in Ukraine. There is another incredibly terrible war in Palestine, and this have had strong effects also on the implementation of the PNRR. One of the main problems of the PNRR that all the public works are in crisis because the costs have become higher and higher and so on and so forth. And this depends on this change of the general situation. And I think that in this general situation there is also the fact that the EU is completely not a big player, really. And it has a strong political crisis that is really evident both in the Ukraine war and in the Palestinian war and so on and so forth. And there are also, so there is a geopolitical situation that's completely different. And there is also a global economic situation that is changing. So I think that we should have also this framework in mind when we analyze the consequences at the European level and at the Italian level of this situation on the implementation of the PNRR. The last point I want to underline is that I think that one of the main points, I agree completely with you, is that the two main pillars of the Recovery Fund were, on one side, the idea to use the Recovery Fund to face and to cope with the problems of COVID, but also to promote through that tool the ecological transition, the idea of green growth and so on and so forth. And in fact, some of the most important parts also of our PNR are based on this idea. Urban forestering, biodiversity, built environment retrofitting, ecological public transportation, and these are relevant part of the program. But on the other side, what is completely missing, at least for me, both in the design and especially in the implementation of the program, is the other pillar, that is that of how to cope with the socio-spatial inequalities that are becoming more and more relevant in the European cities, in the Italian cities, and so on and so forth. From this point of view, the implementation process is evidently an example of how these kind of issues are taken apart from the public debate. The cut to social interventions by the new right-wing government, and so on and so forth. So, I think that we, as Urbanit, should be able to understand better how the general picture is changing, and also to observe specific implementation processes in city, analyzing and considering the assemblage between recovery funds investment and other programs and policies in the city, considering the institutional mechanisms that are working or not working in the cities, with the idea that I completely agree with Marco from many points of view, but remember that in Italy there are a lot of billion euros that are in the city, that are working in the city now. So I think that our goal should be of analyzing these implementation processes, but having in mind the general pictures. That is mostly what you said in your presentation. So I think that the discussion was very useful for us as Urbanit, and I think that it can enrich also our approach in what we can do with the observatory at the Italian level, at the European level in the next weeks and months. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gabriele, who is going to lead our scientific discussion in the next years. So Camilla, who has led.
Well, thank you, Valeria. Good afternoon, everybody, also from my side, and thank you, Ivan, for this wonderful opportunity to think about what's going on outside. Okay, just 3 points, because we had a very long debate. I think we are all tired and we have to go. The first is about a few points that I just highlighted from something that came to my mind during your presentation even. And the first point is that I would say the portrait about how the recovery fund and policies have been designed is really variegated. And this relates the geography of policy design and the geography of implementation, at least in these first phases, then emerges to me as a result of what you said, that there are different kind of specialities, different kind of spatial effects of this recovery fund, variegated geographies, and finally that we are witnessing, I think, a profound change in the policy making models paradigms. It's something that is not already evident, but it's there, although seems that things have not changed so much. But of course, it's just an idea. The second point I stressed is that there are possible innovations that we can start thinking about. But I think that if we stay in this permanent, non-permanent opposition, maybe we risk to miss something. Maybe assuming the lens of the transition studies, the lens that we are working with in research, coordinated by Valeria, it can be useful not to miss some trajectories that can lead us to innovations, okay? Maybe just started with something we don't recognize as something important, relevant for change. Then what I see so far is like a circular process. So we started from city making during the very phase of the COVID, the shock. So you showed a lot of slides, very nice, that you know, portrayed this, depicted this powerful way to change the public space. Then we had this huge effort of policy designed by the European Union through this recovery fund program. And now we have a lot of adaptive, let me say that, policy making, which is what institutions all over the Europe and maybe the world, because you did this, view on what United States is doing, etc., the world is doing. This adaptive policy making, I was saying that is really, producing a very open arena, open to everything, okay? So when you do things in the run, then you cannot really appreciate the kind of change that you are producing. So I think that at the moment, through this adaptive policy making, we are maybe changing something. Okay, this was the first point. The second point is that compared to what you said, I think we really need at this moment of the analysis and the state of the art, a systematic exploration or investigation through policy case studies on the one side. So we need to identify some cases, policy case studies, to really explore with an in-depth analysis how things are going and are done, but also an in-depth analysis on practice of innovation, again through the lens of the transition study, which suggests us to look for niche of innovations and other as I said before, trajectories that can result in a new trends. This has to do with the implementation of the recovery fund in practice. And I think that if we go this way, we can explore the city as a renewed asset, as Valeria was saying at the beginning, maybe in questioning which kind of paradigm we need. This is the green one, the post-growth, the growth, etc., but not being oriented to this idea of a new paradigm. Maybe we have to focus on what is slowly changing, the micro changes that we might produce or we might recognize through practices, cases, whatever they are, of policies or of everyday life. And as a third comment, I think we should focus, I don't know how, but we should focus on framing a new policy model, which is rooted into this idea of integration of funds and programs. And again, the World Economic Forum report that you mentioned suggests this need, I think, with regard to the many kind of programs we have in Europe, but also in the world, and that relate to these mainstream topics, the greening, the sustainable change, development, etc. So I think not to risk to be rhetoric, not to risk to colonize the debate with labels or paradigms, maybe we need, or I suggest to focus on a new policy model that support us in integrating methodologies, policies, funds, and maybe new approaches for coping with the future challenges. So this is my final contributions, and I hope that we can we can save, we can make value, put value on these comments from today in the next effort from Urbanit, which is this idea of having a report on the European state of the art of the recovery fund policy, something different of what has been done by Eurocities and CEDOP, these European institutions that worked on portraying these different countries, European countries' approaches to recovery fund, maybe something that goes directly on case studies which means a more in-depth analysis of how this policy, the Next Generation EU and the Recovery Fund in particular, has been implemented in the real life. So I want to close with this comment. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.
I think we are done.
Yeah? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ivan, and to all of you for being here.
Thank you, Valeria, for having organized this fantastic panel. Thank you very much.
Ciao.